I grew up in the hills of eastern Tennessee, in a town so small you could walk its length in less than an hour. Life there moved slowly, tied to seasons and church bells, but inside our modest house, time often felt heavy and suffocating. My mother, Margaret, had one vision for me, and she made sure I never forgot it. From as early as I can remember, she would grip my shoulders, look me square in the eye, and remind me of what she believed was a woman's sole purpose: marry young, bear children, and serve her husband without question. My mother was a stern woman, not cruel in the traditional sense, but unyielding. She braided my hair so tightly each morning before school that my scalp ached all day. I once dared to say I didn't like it, and she snapped that a proper girl didn't complain about her mother's hands. When I said I wanted to try wearing my hair down, she smacked the back of my head, not enough to hurt deeply, but enough to humiliate me. "Don't you dare get foolish ideas, Madeline," she said. "Your looks aren't yours to waste. One day, your husband will have the final say." My father, Thomas, was gentler, but he rarely intervened. He worked long hours driving a school bus through winding mountain roads. He'd come home smelling of diesel and tobacco, collapse into his chair, and listen quietly while my mother listed all the ways I needed to be molded. Sometimes I would glance at him, silently pleading for him to step in, but he would only sigh, tired eyes lowering to the floor. He wasn't a bad man. He was simply resigned, living proof that in our family Margaret's word was law. Even as a child, though, I wanted more than the narrow life she planned for me. At 12, I borrowed a book from the school library about architecture. The pictures of bridges and skyscrapers filled me with awe. I traced their outlines with my finger, whispering, "Someday I'll build something like this." I began sketching houses in my notebook, drawing porches and staircases, trying to imagine how I could make them real. When my mother discovered the drawings, she tore the pages out and crumpled them in front of me. "Don't fill your head with nonsense," she scolded. "A woman's place is not behind a desk or on a construction site. You'll get married, you'll keep house, and you'll thank me for it." I didn't stop dreaming, though. At 14, I told her I wanted to go to college, maybe start a business one day. Her hand cracked across my cheek before I even realized what she was doing. The sting faded quickly, but the shame lingered. "College," she sneered. "You think men hire women to run things? The only business you'll run is keeping a clean home and raising children." I remember biting back tears, vowing silently that she was wrong. Still, my resistance only hardened her resolve. Each year, as I grew taller and my features matured, she spoke more often about the kind of man she wanted for me. "A real provider," she'd say. "Someone who'll keep you comfortable. Someone who'll make us proud." She never once asked what I wanted, because in her world, my wants did not matter. It was in those years that the weight of tradition pressed down hardest. At church, women were praised for obedience, for standing silently beside their husbands. At family gatherings, my cousins whispered about crushes and plans, while the adults talked about dowries and early marriages. The walls closed in tighter each day, but inside me, a stubborn seed had taken root. I didn't know how or when, but I knew I couldn't live the life my mother scripted for me. Looking back now, I realize those early years shaped the fire that would later keep me alive. Every slap, every scolding, every lecture about submission, it all taught me how much I longed for freedom. My childhood was supposed to prepare me for obedience, but instead it planted in me a quiet rebellion, waiting for the moment it could finally break free. By the spring of my senior year, I had stopped trying to argue with my mother. Graduation was weeks away, and prom was all she could talk about. She said it was my chance to show the world what kind of young woman I was becoming, though in her mind, that meant a chance to catch the right man's eye. She dragged me into town one Saturday morning, determined to find the perfect dress. The boutique was small, a converted storefront on Main Street, racks of satin and sequins crammed into narrow aisles. I had hoped for something simple, maybe a soft blue dress I could actually feel myself in. Margaret dismissed my choices with a wave of her hand. Too plain. You need something that makes people look twice. I was standing behind a faded curtain, tugging at the zipper of a modest dress, when I first heard his voice. Deep, confident, with a tone that made everyone nearby pay attention. I stepped out, the hem brushing my knees, and there he was, Richard Carter. He was older, at least 10 years older than me, but he carried himself like a man who owned every room he entered. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair neatly combed, his suit pressed sharper than anything I'd ever seen in our town. His eyes swept over me, not in a hurried or embarrassed glance, but with a deliberate calm, as though he was appraising something he intended to purchase. I felt my face heat under the weight of it. Margaret lit up instantly, fussing over my dress, then turning to him like he was an old acquaintance. "Well, what do you think?" she asked. Richard smiled faintly and shook his head. "She can do better." Then he called the shop owner by name, and within moments a garment bag appeared, the kind reserved for pieces far too expensive for families like mine. Out came a gown made of crimson silk, the fabric catching the light like fire. "Try this one," he said, handing it directly to me. My fingers trembled as I took it, my mother practically beaming. Back behind the curtain, I slipped into the dress. The cool silk clung to me, cascading down to the floor with a slit that revealed just enough of my legs. When I stepped out, the room fell silent. Margaret gasped, tears in her eyes. Richard nodded once, like a man satisfied with a business deal. As if that weren't enough, he gestured to a box at the counter. Inside lay a pair of black heels, strappy and elegant. "These too," he said. Then he crouched down in front of me, sliding them onto my feet with a composure that felt both gallant and unsettling. "Now she looks ready," he murmured. My mother clasped her hands together, her voice trembling. "Mr. Carter, you're too kind." "It's nothing," he replied smoothly. "Consider it a gift. On one condition, that you allow me the honor of escorting Madeline to her prom." I froze. Margaret didn't hesitate. Of course," she said, answering for me before I could find my voice. Standing there in the red silk, I felt a strange mix of awe and dread. The dress was stunning, the shoes fit perfectly, and for a brief second, I almost believed I looked like someone who belonged in his world. But underneath, my stomach twisted. This wasn't generosity, it was a transaction. I could see it in my mother's shining eyes, in Richard's steady gaze. Something unspoken had just shifted, and I was no longer a girl choosing a dress. I was a prize being presented. I wanted to object, to say I didn't even know this man, that prom was supposed to be a night with friends, not a stage for negotiations. But the words lodged in my throat. Margaret squeezed my arm so tightly I could feel the warning in her grip. "Smile," she hissed under her breath. So I did, though inside it felt like the price of that dress was far more than silk and thread. Prom night passed in a blur. Richard arrived at my door in a sleek black car that seemed out of place on our quiet street. He carried himself like a man accustomed to being admired, and everyone at the dance noticed. Girls whispered behind their hands. Boys stared uneasily. I felt like I had been plucked out of my own world and dropped into his, with no say in the matter. After that night, he appeared at our home more often. He brought flowers for my mother, cigars for my father, and expensive trinkets I didn't know what to do with. Within weeks, he was sitting across from me at dinner, speaking with the confidence of someone who already assumed ownership. Then, one evening, in front of my parents, he placed a velvet box on the table and asked me to be his wife. I was only 18. I hadn't even stepped into college, hadn't had a chance to decide who I was or what I wanted. But my mother clasped her hands in delight, and my father, though quiet, nodded his approval. The decision had already been made. My voice trembled as I said yes, though in truth it wasn't consent, it was surrender. The wedding came swiftly, as if time itself had been rushed to keep me from thinking too much. It was lavish, held in a grand hall in Nashville, filled with guests I didn't know. The dress, the flowers, the orchestra, it was all breathtaking, but none of it felt like mine. I stood at the altar beside Richard, his hand firm around mine, and I felt less like a bride and more like a porcelain doll arranged for display. People congratulated me, praised my beauty, admired Richard's wealth. Their smiles blurred together, a carousel of faces spinning around me. No one asked what I wanted. No one cared if I was happy. I smiled when prompted, posed for photographs, and performed the part assigned to me. When the celebration ended, I was whisked into a new life before I could catch my breath. Richard's apartment in the city was nothing like the modest home I had grown up in. It was sleek, expensive, filled with glass and chrome, a world of quiet luxury. Yet to me it felt cold, impersonal, more like a showroom than a home. Days turned into weeks, and I quickly realized what my life had become. I was cut off from my friends. Richard said they didn't fit the image of a Carter wife. College was no longer an option. He dismissed the idea with a shake of his head. "You won't need to work," he said. "Your job is to be here by my side." He was never unkind in words, but his distance was sharper than cruelty. He treated me with a polished courtesy, as if I were an accessory chosen to complement his success. He never asked about my thoughts or dreams. To him, I was an ornament, a polished piece in his carefully arranged life. I remember standing by the tall windows one evening, looking out at the city lights, realizing how far I had drifted from the girl who once sketched houses in the margins of her schoolbooks. The world had opened wide for Richard, but for me, it had narrowed to the walls of that apartment. I had entered a marriage not as a partner, but as a possession. The first years of marriage unfolded like a slow, repetitive dream. Days bled into each other inside Richard's high-rise apartment, a place filled with polished marble floors, gleaming counters, and furniture that looked like it had been chosen from a catalog. Everything was perfect, everything was expensive, but nothing felt like mine. I had traded the small clutter of my childhood home for silence, so thick it pressed against me. My life narrowed to routines. I woke early, prepared myself carefully, and sat waiting for Richard's return each evening. I cooked sometimes, though he preferred takeout from upscale restaurants. I read books I barely liked, just to fill the hours. At first, I thought I might explore the city on my own, but Richard discouraged it. "There's no need," he said. "What would people think if they saw my wife wandering around aimlessly?" So I stayed inside, watching the world pass me by from behind glass. When my parents visited, my mother's eyes glistened with pride. She walked through the apartment, touching the surfaces as if wealth might rub off on her fingers. "You see, Madeline," she whispered when Richard was out of earshot. "I told you I'd find you the life you deserved. Look at you now." She never noticed the hollowness in my smile, or maybe she refused to. My father patted my shoulder, quiet as always, offering no more than a tired nod. Friends from school stopped calling after a while. At first, I tried to write them letters, to invite them over, but Richard made excuses. "We're too busy," he'd say. "They don't belong in this circle." Eventually, I stopped asking. One by one, the ties that had connected me to who I once was were severed. Richard, for his part, was never cruel in the obvious sense. He bought me jewelry, left envelopes of cash on the dresser, and complimented my appearance before dinners with his colleagues. But beyond that, there was little warmth. He came home late, kissed me on the cheek as if it were a habit rather than affection, and spent most evenings locked in his study, making calls or scrolling through documents. Sometimes I wandered through the apartment at night, barefoot on the cold floors, running my hands along the polished edges of furniture that seemed untouched by life. I felt like one of those objects myself, well kept, carefully placed, meant to be seen, but not truly known. The loneliness grew heavier with each passing month. I dreamed of classrooms I would never sit in, of sketches left unfinished in notebooks my mother had thrown away. I thought of what it might feel like to build something with my own hands, to be recognized for more than the way I looked in a dress. But each morning, I woke to the same reality. Richard's wife, displayed but unseen. The apartment became a golden cage. People on the outside admired it, envied it, praised the husband who provided it. But inside, I felt the bars closing tighter around me. Freedom wasn't denied with chains or locks. It was taken away with silk dresses and polished silverware, with soft words that told me I already had everything I should ever want. I told myself I could endure it, that maybe one day it would change. Yet deep down, a voice whispered that I was disappearing, little by little, until there would be nothing left of the girl I once was. It wasn't until 4 years into our marriage that I finally became pregnant. For Richard, it seemed like the moment he had been waiting for. His smile stretched wider than I had ever seen, and he poured champagne that evening to celebrate. At last, he said, raising his glass, the Carter legacy will continue. He didn't say our child or our family. He said legacy. From the very beginning, I understood what he hoped for. A son, someone to bear his name, someone to inherit everything he had built. Through those long months, I lived with a mixture of hope and dread. I wanted the baby desperately, not for Richard, not for anyone else, but for myself. The idea of holding something that was wholly mine, a life untouched by my mother's demands or Richard's expectations, gave me strength. I sang to the baby in the quiet of the apartment when Richard was away, whispering promises I didn't yet know how to keep. "You won't be lonely," I told the tiny kicks inside me. "I'll be here, always." Richard, meanwhile, busied himself with preparations. He talked endlessly about the nursery, about toys and books for our little man. He even mentioned the private schools he would attend, the connections he would inherit. I listened in silence, my hands resting on the curve of my belly, wondering what would happen if the child wasn't who he expected. When the day came, the labor was long and exhausting. The hospital lights glared down on me, nurses moving in and out, voices murmuring encouragement. At the end of it all, I heard the shrill cry of my baby and felt her tiny body placed against my chest. Tears blurred my vision as I looked down at her face for the first time. Lily, my daughter, my beautiful girl. I don't remember much else from that day except the way my heart swelled, as if all the emptiness of the past years had been filled in an instant. She gripped my finger with surprising strength, her skin soft and warm, her presence more powerful than anything Richard's wealth had ever given me. When Richard entered the room, his expression faltered the moment he saw her. "A girl," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. He leaned closer, trying to mask his disappointment with a forced smile. "She's beautiful," he added, though his eyes didn't quite match the word. In the weeks that followed, his visits to the nursery grew shorter. He no longer spoke about schools or futures. The nursery, painted in neutral tones, sat filled with unopened boxes of toys and books. His interest faded as quickly as it had flared. I pretended not to notice, because Lily filled every corner of my world. Those early nights were the hardest, but also the most precious. I sat in the rocking chair, cradling her in the dim light, humming lullabies my mother had once sung to me. Each tiny breath, each flutter of her eyelids, each cry soothed with a touch. It all reminded me that I had something worth fighting for. Richard began working later, disappearing into meetings, business trips, excuses. He kissed Lily on the forehead occasionally, but I could see the distance in him. To him, she wasn't the heir he had envisioned. To me, she was everything. I no longer cared about the jewelry he left on the dresser or the cars he parked in the garage. None of it mattered compared to the weight of Lily in my arms, her heartbeat against my chest. In her, I found a love that demanded nothing and gave everything. She became my anchor, my light in the suffocating shadows of that apartment. In the quiet hours of dawn, when the city outside still slept and Richard was nowhere to be found, I whispered to her the same vow again and again. "You are not an accessory. You are not a possession. You are my daughter, and I will never let you feel the emptiness I have known." By the time Lily turned 2, life inside Richard's apartment had become a steady rhythm of solitude. My days were consumed with her, feeding, rocking, playing, and though she filled my heart, the silence around us grew heavy. It was in that silence that new neighbors arrived, moving into the condominium next door, Daniel and Amanda Brooks. The first time I met Amanda, she swept into the hallway in a cloud of perfume and laughter, her arms stacked with shopping bags from boutiques I had only ever admired from a distance. She was everything I was not, bold, stylish, and utterly unafraid of being noticed. She wore silk blouses in colors I would never dare and heels that clicked sharply against the marble floor. Her hair was always perfectly arranged, her nails polished like she had stepped out of a magazine. "Madeline, isn't it?" she said that first afternoon, balancing a box on her hip while flashing me a dazzling smile. "We're neighbors now. I think we're going to get along just fine." And somehow we did. Amanda had a way of pulling me into her orbit. She invited me over for coffee, though her coffee usually meant champagne before noon. She filled the air with stories about dinners, galas, and spontaneous trips. Her husband, Daniel, was as wealthy as Richard, and she spent freely, as though money were just another accessory. At first, I was intimidated, but Amanda wouldn't allow distance. She teased me about my plain clothes, insisting I borrow her dresses. She pressed glasses of wine into my hand, laughed loudly at her own jokes, and demanded I laugh along. Against my better judgment, I found myself enjoying her company. For the first time in years, I had someone to talk to who wasn't Lily or Richard. But beneath Amanda's glamour was a bitterness she didn't bother to hide. One afternoon, after too many glasses of rose, she leaned back on her sofa, eyes sharp with cynicism. "Do you really think Richard is faithful?" she asked bluntly. The question hit me like a slap. I stared at her, unsure if I had heard correctly. She smirked at my shock. "Oh, darling, don't look so surprised. Men like ours, they don't marry for love. They marry for appearances. A beautiful wife is a trophy, a decoration on their arm. But when it comes to passion..." She shrugged, swirling the wine in her glass. "They find it elsewhere. Daniel has at least 2 women I know of. Maybe more." I tried to laugh it off, but my chest tightened. "Richard, he's not like that," I said, quietly, though even as I spoke, the words felt fragile. Amanda raised an eyebrow, her smile edged with pity. "They're all like that. Trust me, you just haven't caught him yet." The conversation unsettled me long after I left her apartment. That night, I lay awake beside Richard, listening to his steady breathing, replaying Amanda's words in my head. Her voice slithered into my doubts, feeding on the distance I already felt from him. Soon, I began to notice the details I had once ignored: the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirts, the long evenings when he claimed to be at the office, the late-night calls he stepped out to answer. Alone in the quiet, I studied the way his gaze slid past me, the way his hand brushed Lily's hair absent-mindedly before retreating into his world of business and secrecy. Amanda's words had cracked something open inside me. I couldn't look at Richard the same way anymore. What if she was right? What if, all along, I had been nothing more than a polished ornament in his carefully curated life? For the first time, suspicion took root. And once it did, it grew quickly, wrapping around every moment, every absence, every silence between us. The signs became impossible to ignore. At first, it was just a faint whiff of perfume that wasn't mine, lingering on Richard's shirts when I gathered them for the laundry. Then a strand of long blonde hair caught on the shoulder of his suit jacket, glinting under the light as though mocking me. I told myself there had to be an explanation, but each excuse grew harder to swallow. Richard came home later and later, his excuses rehearsed, his kisses colder. He said business demanded his time, yet his eyes carried a guilt he never acknowledged. When I asked gentle questions, he deflected with practiced ease. "Don't worry yourself, Madeline. You have Lily to think of. But worry not at me. and Amanda's voice echoed constantly in my head. They're all like that. You just haven't caught him yet. One night, after tucking Lily into her crib, I wandered the apartment in restless silence. Richard had come home unusually early, retreating straight into his office. I moved quietly down the hall, drawn by low voices behind the closed door. At first, I thought he was on a business call, but then I recognized the second voice. It was Daniel Brooks. I froze, pressing myself against the wall. Their words slipped through the crack of the door, muffled but distinct enough to shatter me. "She's expecting my son," Richard said, his voice low but certain. "Do you understand? A son. I can't keep living this farce with Madeline." My breath caught. My body went cold from head to toe. Daniel chuckled darkly. "Then divorce her. You've got the money. You think it's that simple?" Richard snapped. "I don't have a prenup. If I divorce her, she takes half of everything I've built." "Half, Daniel. I won't let that happen." The room fell silent for a moment before Richard spoke again, his tone colder than I had ever heard. "There are other ways. Accidents happen every day. A car on a wet road, a fall down the stairs. People grieve, then move on. And Lily, she'll stay in the family with my mother. She'll be raised properly." Daniel's laugh was quiet, almost approving. Practical. Ruthless but practical. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle the sob rising in my throat. I staggered backward, heart pounding so loudly I was sure they would hear it. Richard, my husband, the man who had chosen my wedding dress, the father of my child, was plotting my death. I didn't wait to hear more. Somehow, I reached Lily's room, my body trembling as I lifted her from her crib. She stirred, whimpering softly before settling against my shoulder. I pressed my cheek to her warm head, whispering through tears, "We have to go, baby. We have to go now." I stuffed a few clothes into a bag, my fingers clumsy with panic. I grabbed Lily's blanket, her bottle, whatever I could manage in minutes that felt like seconds. My ears strained for footsteps, for the sound of the office door opening. The weight of fear pushed me forward faster. When I stepped into the hallway, the air itself felt sharper, every shadow dangerous. I knew if I hesitated, if I tried to rationalize or confront, I might never see another morning. Richard would never let me walk away, not alive. So I ran, with Lily pressed tight to my chest and the bag slung over my shoulder. I slipped out the service door, my heart pounding louder than the city's night traffic. The cool air hit my face like a slap, urging me onward. There was no plan, no destination, only the instinct to escape. That night, beneath the glow of the street lamps and the weight of betrayal, I made a silent vow. Richard would not decide how my story ended. I would rather face the unknown with my daughter in my arms than stay another day in the gilded cage he had built for me. The night swallowed us whole as I slipped away from the apartment, clutching Lily tight against me. Her tiny body was warm and trusting, her head tucked beneath my chin. She didn't know the terror that pushed my every step, but her soft breaths steadied me. The city lights faded behind us as I kept walking, each block carrying us closer to the dark outline of the Appalachians. I didn't think, I just moved. My feet carried me toward the woods, as though instinct knew what logic couldn't. Branches creaked in the cold wind, and the moon hung low, casting silver light across the hills. Fear pressed down on me with every sound. I imagined Richard's men behind me, imagined his car pulling up, his hand grabbing my arm. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle in the underbrush a warning. The deeper we went, the quieter it became, the hum of the city replaced by the chorus of night insects and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. My shoes sank into damp soil, my breath clouded in the chill air. Lily stirred, whimpering softly, and I whispered to her, "Shoo, baby mama's here. Just a little farther." Hours seemed to stretch into eternity. My arms ached from holding her, but I refused to let go. My legs trembled as I stumbled over roots and uneven ground. More than once, I nearly fell, catching myself against tree trunks, my chest heaving. My mind screamed that I couldn't keep going, but the thought of Richard's cold words, "Accidents happen every day," forced me forward. At one point, exhaustion nearly won. I sank to my knees on the forest floor, clutching Lily as tears blurred my vision. The silence around me pressed heavy, broken only by her faint cries. I looked up at the moon through the branches, whispering a desperate prayer. "Please, just let us make it through tonight." When I pushed myself up again, I saw it, a faint outline through the trees. A roof, slanted and weathered, half hidden by the forest. My heart lurched. A cabin. Hope sparked like fire in my chest, fragile, but enough to carry me the last few steps. The cabin stood worn and solitary, its wooden walls dark with age, smoke faintly rising from a chimney. I hesitated, fear mingling with relief. Who lived here? Would they turn us away, or worse, send word back to Richard? But I had no choice. Lily whimpered again, her tiny fists clutching at my sweater, and I knew I couldn't keep wandering. I climbed the creaking steps and raised my hand to knock, but before I could, the door opened. A man stood in the frame, tall, broad-shouldered, with lines carved deep into his face by years of solitude. His hair was streaked with gray, his eyes sharp but not unkind. He took in sight of me, mud-stained clothes, wild eyes, a baby clutched desperately to my chest. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he stepped aside, his voice low and steady. "Come in. You look like you've been running for your life." I wanted to collapse right there on the threshold, but I forced myself to step inside. Warmth from a small fire wrapped around us, the scent of wood smoke filling the air. The man closed the door behind us, shutting out the forest, and the dangers I feared were still chasing me. "I'm Samuel Hayes," he said simply. "You don't have to explain tonight. Just rest." His words were calm, certain, as though he understood what it meant to be hunted by shadows. I sank into the nearest chair, clutching Lily tighter, and for the first time that night I allowed myself to breathe. The cabin smelled of cedar and smoke, the kind of warmth that seeps into your bones after hours in the cold. Samuel moved with quiet purpose, setting a kettle on the stove and pulling down blankets from a shelf. He didn't ask questions right away. Instead, he placed a bowl of stew in front of me, thick with potatoes and venison, and a cup of warm milk for Lily. "Eat," he said simply, and for the first time in days I did. Each bite chased away the edge of fear, clinging to me, though my hand still trembled as I fed Lily. Samuel sat nearby, not hovering, not prying, just present. His silence was steadying, a reminder that not every man filled the air with demands. When Lily finally fell asleep, wrapped in one of his wool blankets, I laid her gently on a cot in the corner. I sank into the chair by the fire, my body aching from the run, my mind whirling with everything I'd heard, everything I'd done. The flames crackled, and in their glow, Samuel's gaze rested on me. Not sharp, not judgmental, but patient. "You don't have to tell me," he said after a while, his voice low, rough like gravel softened by years of solitude. "But you've got the look of someone carrying more than she can hold." The words broke something in me. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding the story inside until it spilled out in gasps and fragments. I told him about Richard, about the perfume and the late nights, about Amanda's bitter warnings that had lodged in my chest. I told him about the night I pressed my ear to the door and heard my husband plotting an accident, the way my knees gave out when I realized the man I trusted was willing to erase me for convenience. My voice cracked as I spoke of Lily, of clutching her in the dark and running with no plan but survival. Samuel didn't interrupt. He let me speak, nodding occasionally, his expression unreadable but never cold. When I finished, the silence stretched, filled only by the hiss of the fire. For the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of my story. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "I know what it's like," he said, "to be trapped in a life that feels like a cage. I had power once, family money, a business that was supposed to be mine. But all of it came with chains, expectations, lies. So I left, walked away from it all. People called me a fool. Maybe I was. But I'd rather be a fool out here than a prisoner in a mansion. I studied him, the strong lines of his face softened by the firelight. His words carried no boast, only truth. He had chosen solitude over wealth, freedom over pretense. In that moment, I envied him. Why help me? I asked quietly. His eyes met mine. Because I can. Because someone should. And because I see the fight in you, even if you don't see it yourself yet. I lowered my gaze, tears pricking my eyes again, but they weren't the same tears of fear I'd shed all night. These were softer, edged with relief. For so long, I had been reduced to an accessory, a possession, a shadow in my own life. But sitting there, warmed by Samuel's kindness and the fire's glow, I felt something stir that I thought I had lost forever. The fragile beginning of trust, the first glimmer of hope that maybe I wasn't broken beyond repair. Days in the cabin soon fell into a rhythm unlike anything I had known before. Mornings began with the sound of birdsong instead of Richard's brisk footsteps on marble floors. I would step outside with Lily wrapped in a blanket, the mountain air crisp against our skin, and watch the sun climb over the ridges. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney, and for the first time in years I felt like I was breathing freely. Life there was simple. I cooked over the wood stove, washed dishes in a basin, and folded laundry that smelled of pine and smoke instead of chemical detergents. My hands, once idle in Richard's apartment, found purpose again, rocking Lily to sleep, mending her clothes, chopping vegetables alongside Samuel when he offered to share his garden's harvest. There was no glamour, no glittering chandeliers or polished silverware, but there was honesty in every small task. Samuel kept his distance when needed, never pressing into spaces that weren't his. He would chop wood outside or spend hours repairing the cabin's porch, but I always knew he was there if I needed him. Sometimes we sat together by the fire after Lily had fallen asleep, trading quiet stories. He never pried, never judged, and in his presence I felt a kind of safety that wealth had never given me. At night, when Lily curled against me, I thought about the life I had left behind. Richard, with his tailored suits and cold eyes, his empire built on appearances. I wondered if he had even noticed I was gone, or if his mind was already consumed with his mistress and the child she carried. Perhaps he was furious, perhaps he was relieved, but it no longer mattered. Because here, in the stillness of the mountains, I realized something I had been too afraid to admit. I didn't need revenge in the way I once thought. I didn't need Richard to fall to his knees, to beg forgiveness, or to face public humiliation. His downfall was already written in the hollow way he lived, in the greed that would eat at him, in the lies that would unravel one by one. He had chosen a life where love was an accessory and family a bargaining chip. That life would eventually consume him. My revenge, if it could be called that, was simpler. It was in every breath I took free of his control. It was in Lily's laughter echoing through the cabin. It was in the way I could finally close my eyes at night without fear of being erased by man's ambition. There were moments I caught Samuel watching Lily toddle across the floor, his rough features softening. Sometimes his gaze lingered on me too, not with ownership or calculation, but with quiet respect. I didn't know what the future held for us, for him, for me, for the fragile family we had begun to build within those walls. And maybe that was the point. For the first time in my life, the future was mine to shape. One morning, as the first snow dusted the cabin roof, I stepped outside with Lily in my arms. The world was still, the forest hushed in white. I pressed my lips to her forehead and whispered, "We're free." And in that moment, I knew the truth I had chased through the darkness of betrayal and fear. Sometimes revenge isn't about making the betrayer suffer. Sometimes it's about walking away, choosing a better life, and letting them destroy themselves with the very ambition that drove them to betray you. The door slammed shut behind us with a finality that cracked something deep inside me. I stood frozen on the front porch, holding Noah tight against my coat, his small arms wrapped around my waist, his voice trembling. "Mommy, I'm cold." I couldn't feel my face, not from the February wind biting at my cheeks, but from shock. Just minutes ago, we were returning from Vivian's funeral. I had buried the woman who had lived under the same roof with me for 10 years. And now, my husband, Daniel, had thrown us out into the snow like we were strangers, like we were garbage. I turned around slowly, my gaze locking on the heavy oak door of the house that used to be mine. I could hear the bolt sliding into place, deliberate and loud. It was like listening to the sound of a verdict being delivered. Guilty, without trial. We had lived in that Cleveland house for a decade, a 2-story colonial with white window frames and creaky floorboards that once felt like home. I had cooked countless meals in that kitchen, kissed Daniel in the hallway, rocked our son to sleep upstairs, and now I stood outside with nothing but the clothes on my back and a child shivering in a funeral jacket. Noah looked up at me, his eyes wide and confused. He looked so much like Daniel it made my stomach twist. "Why did Daddy lock us out?" he whispered. I couldn't answer. Because how do you explain betrayal to a 7-year-old? How do you make sense of something you don't understand yourself? It happened so fast. Too fast. One moment we were at the cemetery, Daniel holding my hand so tightly during the eulogy that it hurt. The next, we were home and his grief twisted into rage. He screamed things I'd never imagined he'd think, let alone say. "You killed her," he shouted. "With your selfishness, your coldness. She saw right through you, Elise. And I was blind." Then he yanked my coat off the rack, shoved it into my arms, and grabbed Noah by the wrist. I begged, not in front of our son, not like this. But he didn't hear me, or didn't care. "Get out," he spat. "You'll get your things later. I don't want to see you again." Now here we were, in 15-degree weather, no money in my pocket, no working phone. Because of course I hadn't thought to charge it. All I'd done this morning was try to be a good daughter-in-law, a respectful wife, a steady mother. I held my son tighter, trying to shield him from the wind that whipped around us like punishment. My lips were going numb, and my fingers barely moved. "We'll figure this out," I whispered into Noah's hair. "Mommy's got you. We'll figure this out." I reached into my coat pocket for habit, searching for my phone, and instead my hand brushed against something cold. Metal. I pulled it out and stared. A key. Not from our front door. Not from any drawer or cabinet I knew. It had an ornate head, old-fashioned, like something out of a Victorian jewelry box. I blinked. Where had this come from? I hadn't seen it before. I hadn't put it there. My mind scrambled for answers, but came up with nothing. Not now. Not here. I shoved it back into my pocket and focused on Noah's chapped face. We had to move. Standing here would only freeze us. "Do you remember Aunt Monica?" I asked him gently. "She has that fat orange cat, remember?" Noah nodded slowly. "Barley." "Barley," I said with a smile that barely lifted my frozen lips. "We're going to her place. It's far, but we can take the bus." Monica was my best friend in college. We had drifted mostly because Vivian never approved of her. She wasn't refined enough. I'd never cared. But over time, her disapproval worked like erosion, slowly grinding me down until I stopped calling Monica, except on birthdays. Still, I hoped she'd understand. She had to. Noah nodded again, still stunned. I reached into my other pocket, pulled out a few crumpled bills, a handful of singles, and one $5 note. Bus fare. Maybe. "Come on, baby," I said. "Let's find the stop." We walked down the icy sidewalk of the neighborhood I used to call my own. The houses were silent, the street empty. Most people were at work or inside, avoiding the cold. Our boots crunched over salt-stained snow, and I kept glancing back at our house, but the windows stayed dark. No one came out. 15 minutes later, we found the shelter of a bus stop a glass-walled booth with a peeling RTA schedule. A woman already sat inside, bundled in layers, peering at us like we didn't belong. Maybe we didn't. Noah sat next to me, trembling. I pulled him into my arms, wrapped my scarf around both our faces. "The bus will come soon," I told him. "Monica will make tea. And she always has cookies. Remember?" He nodded. Then, after a pause, "Do we still live at home?" I didn't know what to say. Not because I didn't want to lie, but because I didn't know the truth anymore. I stroked his hair and murmured, "For now, we just need to stay warm." As the bus pulled up, creaking and groaning in protest of the cold, I felt the weight of the key pressing into my side again. Strange, unfamiliar, but heavy, like it meant something I wasn't ready to face. The bus rattled and groaned as it pulled away from the stop, its heater barely keeping the icy draft at bay. Noah curled up beside me on the cracked vinyl seat, his breath fogging the window. Outside, the snow-covered streets of Cleveland slid by. Old brick buildings, telephone poles tangled in icicles, empty sidewalks. I kept one arm wrapped around him, trying to lend him whatever warmth I had left. My other hand rested inside my coat pocket, fingers curled around the strange key. It had warmed against my skin, but the unease it stirred hadn't faded. It felt wrong somehow, like something out of place or out of time. Noah was quiet for most of the ride. Too quiet. His little face, usually bright with curiosity, was slack with exhaustion. I could tell he was trying to stay brave, not to cry, not to ask too many questions. But I knew what he was thinking. Why had Daddy yelled? Why had he locked the door? Why were we on a bus to somewhere that wasn't home? I brushed a few flakes of snow from his eyelashes and whispered, "You're being so strong. I'm proud of you, baby." He nodded against my shoulder but said nothing. We rode for 30 minutes, each stop jerking us back into the moment. Each passing minute felt surreal. I kept replaying the morning in my mind like a broken film reel. 1 minute, I was helping Noah button his funeral coat. The next, I was on the porch with frozen fingers and a bruised heart. I tried to anchor myself with something solid, something real. Monica, her apartment, her voice on the other end of the line. Years ago, when I cried about Vivian's passive-aggressive remarks. "You don't owe that woman your soul," she had said. "Marriage isn't a hostage situation." The final stop came too soon. I nudged Noah awake and helped him off the bus. The snow had started falling again, soft but relentless. Monica lived in Tremont in a narrow old walk-up with peeling paint and windows that always glowed orange in the evening. Her apartment wasn't fancy. Vivian had once referred to it as bohemian in the bad way, but it had something my house never did. Warmth that didn't come from the thermostat. The walk to her building took 10 minutes, every step a struggle against wind and slush. My boots leaked. Noah's nose was bright red. My hands, numb again, fumbled for the door code. Of course I didn't remember it. Why would I? It had been almost 3 years since I visited in person. Then I spotted the old payphone on the corner, miraculously still functioning. I dug in my pocket for coins, prayed I had enough. I did, barely. Monica answered after 2 rings. Her voice, warm and alert, crackled through the receiver. "Hello." "Monica," I breathed, my lips barely moving. "It's Elise. I need help." There was a pause. No questions. Just a sharp inhale, and then, "What's the code on the door?" Relief hit me so hard I almost dropped the phone. She recited the numbers. "Come up. I'll have tea waiting." The climb up 4 flights of stairs nearly finished me. The elevator had been broken since college. I held Noah's hand tightly, using his small, determined steps to push myself forward. When we reached the landing, Monica was already there, standing in the doorway, arms folded, eyes wide. She hadn't changed much. Short auburn hair, hoodie over pajama pants, no makeup but the kind of glow that came from authenticity. She didn't say anything, just opened her arms and let me fall into them. She didn't ask why I looked like I'd survived a hurricane. Didn't question the funeral clothes or the glassy stare in my eyes. She just helped me out of my coat, took Noah's scarf off gently, and led us into the warmth of her small living room. The heat wrapped around me like a blanket. So did the smell of chamomile and old wood. Barley the cat meowed from his perch on the windowsill and leapt down to sniff Noah's boots. I sat on the couch while Monica poured tea. Noah sat cross-legged on the rug, cradling the warm mug Monica gave him. He sipped slowly, as if the steam could undo the morning. Monica handed me mine and sat across from me, not saying a word until Noah looked sufficiently distracted by Barley's twitching tail. Then, her voice soft, she said, "Tell me everything." So I did. The funeral, the door, the scream, the way Daniel's eyes had changed. Grief curdled into hatred. The cold, the bus, the key. I kept my voice low, not wanting Noah to catch the sharp edges of my story. But Monica didn't miss a thing. Her brows drew together. Her hand gripped her mug so tightly the knuckles went white. When I finished, she simply said, "You're not going back there." I nodded slowly. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. That night, Noah and I curled up on the pull-out couch. He fell asleep within minutes, clutching Barley's toy mouse in one hand. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, my body stiff from tension I couldn't shake. I reached into my pocket again and felt the key. Heavy, still warm, still wrong. Why would Vivian have put that in my coat? And when? I turned onto my side, facing Noah's peaceful face. He looked younger asleep, less burdened. I thought of Daniel's face as he slammed the door, and of Vivian's cold gaze at our wedding 10 years ago. That key, that old key, it had to mean something. I just didn't know it yet. But tomorrow I would find out. I had to. Morning came with a dull gray light bleeding through the curtains, the kind that made everything feel suspended in time. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the front door slamming shut. Heard Daniel's voice echoing in my head, "You killed her." And underneath the grief, the confusion, the exhaustion, was that key. I could still feel the weight of it pressing against my ribs, heavy and deliberate, like it had been waiting for me to notice it. And now I couldn't ignore it any longer. Monica had already left for work. She'd scribbled a note in her usual all-caps handwriting and taped it to the fridge. Toast in the oven. "Don't let Barley eat your bagel. I'll be back by 5. Call if you need anything." Seriously. I smiled for a second, then turned to see Noah still asleep on the pull-out bed, his small body curled in on itself, breathing slow and steady. I tucked the blanket around him and walked toward my coat, hanging limply by the front door. I reached into the pocket and pulled it out again, metal, aged, oddly beautiful. I turned it over in my palm, remembering the intricate floral etching on the head, the slight bend in the shaft like it had been used 1,000 times. And then it came to me, Vivian's desk, the antique secretary she kept in her bedroom. I had never once seen the top drawer open. When I asked about it once, years ago, she'd said with a clipped smile, "Those are personal papers, Elise. Nothing for you to worry about." She never left the key in the lock, never invited me to sit at that desk. Now I was holding the key in my hand, and she was gone. I waited until Noah woke up and gave him a warm breakfast, then told him we needed to go back home for just a moment to pick up a few things. "Daddy won't be there," I said gently, watching his face for signs of fear or hope. He just nodded, chewing slowly. I packed a small bag, checked the time, almost 11 a.m., and prayed Daniel would still be at work. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the spare set of house keys I hadn't had the chance to return. The bus ride back was quiet. Noah stared out the window, saying nothing. I don't know what he was thinking, but I could feel the shift in his little body, a stiffness, a watchfulness, like he was bracing for something. As the bus neared our street, my chest tightened. I clutched my coat tighter around me. I told myself we'd be in and out. 5 minutes. grab essentials, leave. The house stood there unchanged and yet no longer ours. The snow on the front lawn was still trampled from the funeral. The wreath Monica had left days ago was frozen to the porch rail. No car in the driveway, no movement inside. I tried the key. The door clicked open. Stepping into the foyer felt like crossing into a ghost town. Everything was in its place, the coat rack, the shoe tray, the mirror. But the air was different, empty, watchful. Noah ran upstairs to get his schoolbooks and favorite toys while I moved quickly toward the second floor. I didn't pause. I didn't let myself think. I went straight to Vivian's room. It was as immaculate as ever. Bed perfectly made. Nightstand arranged with her perfume and reading glasses. And there, against the far wall, the dark mahogany secretary with its ornate drawers and brass handles. My pulse quickened. I pulled the key from my coat and knelt. It slid in without resistance. A soft click. The drawer opened. Inside, neatly arranged in a stack, were envelopes, papers, and a single cream-colored letter addressed in Vivian's sharp, old-fashioned script to Elise. My breath caught. I looked at the name again. Not daughter-in-law, not Mrs. Martin, not Zenaida, as she so condescendingly used to say, dragging out my name like it was an accusation. Just Elise. I took the letter, folded, heavy, thick with multiple pages. My heart thundered in my ears. I didn't open it. Not yet. Not there. I stuffed it into my coat pocket, just as I heard footsteps on the stairs. Noah. Mom? Are we done? I turned and nodded. Yeah, let's go. But as we walked down the stairs, the front door creaked open. I froze. Daniel's voice echoed through the house. Elise. I grabbed Noah's hand. My mind raced. The back door. Through the kitchen. Come on, I whispered, tugging him with me. He hesitated. But Daddy, later, sweetheart. Now. We made it to the back steps, just as Daniel appeared in the hallway. He didn't shout. He didn't chase. He just stood there, eyes narrowed, voice low. I told you not to come back. I didn't answer. I pushed the door open and stepped into the snow, not looking back. I didn't have the strength. We ran all the way to the bus stop, hearts pounding, breath fogging in the cold. When we finally sat down on the rattling bench, Noah clutched his backpack and asked quietly, why was Daddy mad again? I swallowed hard, because he's confused right now, and sad, but we're safe. That's what matters. My fingers brushed against the folded letter in my pocket. Its weight was different from the key. This wasn't just metal or memory. This was truth. Maybe ugly, maybe cruel, but truth. And once I read it, nothing would ever be the same. I just didn't know if I was ready. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep, curled beside me on Monica's pull-out couch, I sat alone in the kitchen with only the fridge's quiet hum for company. The envelope lay on the table in front of me like a wound that hadn't been touched. I stared at it for what felt like hours. My tea had gone cold. My spine ached from exhaustion, but my fingers wouldn't move to open it. Because what if the letter only confirmed the worst? That Vivian had spent years orchestrating my erasure? That my marriage had never been mine to keep? That love hadn't been enough? The silence was broken by a vibration. My phone lit up. A new message from Daniel. Just 5 words. Don't come back. I'm filing. Then another one, almost immediately. You used us for money. Mom knew it. I should have listened. I blinked. Not from tears, those had dried up days ago, but from disbelief. Used us for money? For 10 years, I had raised our son, taken care of that house, swallowed every insult his mother served in lace and lipstick. And now, after throwing me into the cold, he wanted to claim I was a gold digger? Something snapped. I grabbed the letter, my breath catching as I tore the seal. Inside were several pages of mismatched paper, lined notebook sheets, printer scraps, one written on the back of a grocery list. It was messy, raw, like it had been written in pieces. I read the first line and felt my skin prickle. If you're reading this, Elise, then I've already passed. And it means you found the key I left in your coat pocket. My hands trembled. I know my heart is failing. I felt it for months, tightness in my chest, breath growing short. But there are things I need to say before I go. Things I was too proud to say out loud while I lived. I inhaled sharply. I never liked you. It wasn't written cruelly, just plainly. A fact. From the moment Daniel brought you home, I saw you as a threat. You were young, smart, warm. You loved him with a depth I couldn't give. And he loved you. He lit up when you entered a room. I saw him slipping away from me. So I did what I'd always done to protect what was mine. I controlled, manipulated, whispered things he shouldn't have heard. I made him doubt you, piece by piece. My eyes blurred. I wiped them quickly and kept reading. It started small. She didn't season the soup. She doesn't tuck Noah in right. She's always spending. But I knew what I was doing. I watched his expressions change. I saw suspicion bloom where there had been love. I planted it. I watered it. And I smiled while doing it. I didn't want to hate you, but I hated what you represented. A life I couldn't be part of. A love I'd lost. I dropped the paper, breath catching like it was too big to take in. 10 years. 10 years of confusion, of wondering why Daniel would turn so cold for no reason, why he'd look at me sometimes like I was a stranger. And now I knew. It hadn't come from nowhere. It had come from her. The next page was different, rushed handwriting, ink smudged. I don't know if I'll give this to you while I'm alive. Maybe I'm too much of a coward. Maybe I'll hide it. But if you find it, know this. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just need you to understand. Daniel didn't fall out of love with you. He was led away, step by step, by me. I pressed the pages against my chest, gasping silently. Grief wasn't what I felt. It was fury. Righteous, white-hot fury. Vivian had weaponized love, had poisoned her own son's view of me with precision. And now she was gone, and I was left with the rubble. And then, folded between the last 2 pages, was something new, a name. Lillian Hughes. She knows everything. She was my friend, and the only one who tried to stop me. She lives at 412 Maple Avenue. I stared at the address. Lillian, the woman who used to come by for tea, whose sharp eyes always lingered on me with something I now recognized as pity. She had known. Maybe she still did. And if I wanted to fight for my marriage, or at least my son's future, maybe I needed to talk to her, to gather the whole truth, to hold it up in front of Daniel's face and say, see, you were tricked. You let yourself be tricked. But even as I thought it, I felt the fatigue wrap tighter around my ribs. Did I really want to win him back? Or did I just want him to hurt the way I had? I didn't know. Not yet. What I did know was that Noah needed protection. From the legal threats. From being torn in half between parents. From the legacy of a woman who couldn't bear to be replaced. I folded the letter back into the envelope. It felt heavier now, as if it carried more than ink. I looked across the room at my sleeping son and whispered to no one, I won't let you lose him, too. Not to your father. Not to your grandmother. Not even to me. The call came the next morning, just as I was braiding Noah's hair to distract him from asking more questions. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something in me, some motherly instinct, some gut warning honed by too many sleepless nights, made me pick it up. Is this Elise Martin? The woman asked, her voice sharp with urgency. I'm a nurse at Cleveland Heights Children's Clinic. Your son Noah was brought in by a school aide. High fever, possible pneumonia. We need you to come as soon as possible. I froze. Noah was standing right there in front of me. I blinked. No, not Noah, my Noah. Healthy. Safe. Confused. Then I realized they meant yesterday's visit. The school must have tried calling me, didn't get through, and took him straight to the clinic. And because I wasn't listed as the primary guardian anymore, Not officially, not since Daniel filed the petition. They had called him. My stomach dropped. I was Noah's mother. But on paper, I wasn't enough. I gathered our things quickly, told Monica what happened, and called for a rideshare. The clinic was only 15 minutes away, but each minute dragged like wet concrete. The letter from Vivian burned in my purse. I hadn't shown it to Daniel. Not yet. I didn't know if I ever would. But now I needed him. Or more accurately, Noah did. And I couldn't let my anger, my pride, or even my grief stand in the way of that. When I arrived, I found Noah lying in an observation room, pale and sweating, but awake. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Mom," he croaked, trying to sit up. I rushed to him, pulling him into my arms. He was warm. Too warm. The nurse came in with a clipboard and a professional smile, already briefing me on his vitals. I tried to focus, to nod in the right places, but my eyes kept drifting to the door, half expecting Daniel to burst in and demand to know what I was doing there. He didn't come. Instead, a nurse informed me calmly that Mr. Martin had already approved transport to the hospital and signed preliminary consent forms. He'd be arriving shortly. Of course he would. 15 minutes later, Daniel stepped into the room, all sharp angles and pressed sleeves, carrying a folder of documents and the expression of someone who'd had years of practice keeping his emotions in a chokehold. He glanced at me only once, then walked to the foot of the bed and gently touched Noah's ankle. "Hey, buddy," he said, voice lower than usual. "You gave us a scare." Noah smiled faintly. "Mom's here, too." Daniel didn't respond to that. We spent the next hour in the same room, orbiting our son, but never acknowledging each other. The doctors came in, ran tests, discussed admitting him overnight. Daniel nodded, took notes, asked questions. I just held Noah's hand. I didn't have the strength to be impressive. I only had the strength to be his mother. Eventually, we were left alone. Daniel stood near the window, looking out at the slushy parking lot. I stood behind him, the letter a weight in my purse, words blistering inside me. Do it now, I told myself. Show him. End this. But when he turned around, I didn't move. He looked exhausted, not just from Noah's condition, but from everything. His eyes, once so soft, were hollow. Not cruel, not angry, just lost. "You can stay tonight," he said abruptly. "I'll talk to the nurses. It's better if he sees you when he wakes up." I blinked. "You're okay with that?" "It's not about me," he muttered. "It's about him." He was right. It was about Noah. That night, in the harsh blue light of the hospital corridor, I watched Daniel fall asleep in a plastic chair beside Noah's bed. His arms were folded, chin tucked into his chest, like a man who'd run out of ways to hold himself together. I sat on the opposite side, the chair biting into my spine, my fingers still gripping the envelope in my lap. I could hand it to him. I could make him read every ugly word. But I didn't, because in that moment I realized something terrifying. Even if he read it, even if he believed it, there was no guarantee he'd come back. No guarantee he'd look at me the same way. Some damage doesn't unbreak. Some cracks, once spidered through a foundation, are just waiting for the next pressure point to collapse the whole thing. I leaned over and kissed Noah's forehead, whispering the same words I'd been whispering for days now. "You're safe. I've got you. We're okay." But this time, I didn't just say it for him. I said it for me. Noah was discharged 3 days later, his pneumonia under control, but his energy still low. Daniel and I took turns staying at the hospital, passing each other like ghosts in the hallway. Polite, functional, mechanical. He didn't bring up the past, and I didn't press. Our only shared priority was Noah. When he finally returned to Monica's apartment with me, quieter than usual but eager to be in his own pajamas again, I felt something shift. Not in him. In me. That night, once he was asleep, I returned to the letter. I hadn't touched it since the hospital. But now, in the stillness of Monica's kitchen, I opened the final pages. The handwriting was different, shaky, blurred, blotched with ink and emotion. Vivian must have written this in her last hours. The paper smelled faintly of perfume and bitterness. I'm writing this because I don't know how much time I have left, it began. Elise, if you're still reading, it means you haven't torn this up. That means something. Maybe that you're stronger than I gave you credit for. Maybe that you deserve to know all of it. I sat down slowly. I lied to Daniel, she wrote. I lied so many times I stopped counting. I told him you were using him, that you were selfish, that you resented me. I told him you flirted with his coworkers, that you talked behind his back, that you were never truly committed to this family. None of it was true. You know that. I know that. But he didn't, because he loved me, and I used that love like a weapon. I couldn't breathe. He defended you at first, said I was imagining things, but I didn't stop. I kept pressing, softly, patiently, planting doubt like seeds. And Daniel, my boy, he wanted peace. He didn't want to choose, so he started pulling away from you, hoping to quiet the noise between us. But it never stopped, because I never let it. The next lines were a confession of sorts. She spoke of her loneliness after her husband's death, her fear of being discarded, of being replaced by a younger woman who smiled too easily and didn't ask for permission to love. You weren't the villain, she wrote, but I needed you to be, because if Daniel loved you the way he used to love me, then where did that leave me? I read those words over and over again. Where did that leave me? They echoed like a bell in a hollow room. And then at the bottom of the final page, scrawled in handwriting barely legible, he still loves you, Elise. He always has. I just made him forget how to show it. If you want to walk away, I understand. If you want to stay, give him this letter. Let him remember. I stared at that line for a long time. Give him this letter. Let him remember. But could I? Would he believe it? Or would he call it forged, manipulated, a last-ditch effort to save a broken marriage he no longer wanted? The next morning, I called Lillian Hughes. She answered on the second ring. Elise, she said, not surprised. I was wondering when you'd call. I met her in a quiet corner cafe off Maple Avenue. She was dressed in navy wool, her white hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She looked exactly as I remembered, sharp-eyed, calm, impossible to read. I read the letter, I said after we sat down. Vivian named you. Lillian nodded. I knew she might. She wrote it in pieces. Read me parts now and then. She was unraveling at the end, finally realizing what she'd done. Why didn't you stop her? I tried, she said, for years. But Vivian wasn't someone you changed. She had to reach her own conclusions. Unfortunately, she reached them too late. I stared into my coffee, unsure what I expected. A magic solution? A script? She destroyed us, I said softly. Daniel and me. Noah's sense of safety. My identity. She was scared, Lillian replied. Scared of being irrelevant. Of dying alone. She made me alone, I snapped. She made him choose. Lillian tilted her head. And what if he didn't? I blinked. What? What if Daniel never truly chose? What if he was just surviving between two fires? What if no one taught him how to say enough to either of you? I wanted to argue, but I couldn't, because she was right. Later that day, Daniel called. Noah had left a toy at the hospital, and Daniel had picked it up. He offered to swing by Monica's to drop it off. I agreed. When he arrived, he barely looked at me, just handed the plastic dinosaur to Noah and stood in the doorway like he was trying to decide whether to speak or vanish. I found the letter, I said, voice steady. He looked up. What letter? From your mother. She left it in the secretary desk. She admitted everything. His face didn't change, but something in his posture did. She said, you still love me, I added. A long pause. Then, I don't know what I feel right now. I can't undo what I've done. I'm not asking you to. Silence stretched between us. You can read it, I said, holding out the envelope. Or not. But I needed you to know the truth wasn't what she told you. He didn't take the letter, but he didn't walk away either. We stood there, two broken people with a child between us, both guilty in different ways, both aching in the same. For now, that was enough. I closed the door slowly behind him and turned to find Noah sitting cross-legged on the floor, playing with his dinosaur. "Is Daddy coming back?" he asked. I sat beside him. "I don't know, sweetheart," I whispered. "But we are," I added. "We're coming back to ourselves." And that's something his grandmother could never destroy.